In the vast expanse of the Old West, where the horizon stretches far beyond the eye's reach and the very air carries stories untold, legends were forged in blood, dust, and fire. This is the tale of a land shrouded in myth, where every shadow seemed to hide a deadly truth, and every whispered rumor could spiral into violence. The Canyon of Death, as it was known, was a place where the line between life and death blurred. And this was not just another painted tale of the Wild West. It is a collection of the most bizarre, haunting, and true stories that have outlived their time, growing ever more surreal as they echo through history. Today, you're about to delve into some of the most incredible facts of the Old West, where reality was often stranger than fiction. From a painting of a bull that sparked a deadly shootout, to a near war between the U.S. government and religious settlers in Utah, to an epic gunfight that lasted no longer than a fleeting breath, these stories, though seemingly impossible, are rooted in the dust of history. First, we unravel the curious story of a painting that resulted in 2 deaths, and a famous line that has since echoed through the pages of history. In 1871, the proprietors of the Bull's Head Saloon in Kansas thought it clever to paint an image of a bull on the saloon's outer wall. But this wasn't just any bull, it was a grotesquely exaggerated, overly endowed version of the animal. What might seem a crude joke to some quickly turned into an explosive controversy. The townspeople were outraged, so much so that they enlisted the help of none other than Wild Bill Hickok, the famous lawman, to take it down. Hickok, not one to be intimidated, ordered the mural removed. The saloon owners, furious at his interference, decided to threaten the marshal. One of them boasted that he could shoot a crow on the wing, a veiled threat against Hickok. With calm defiance, Hickok replied with what would become one of the West's most famous retorts. Did the crow have a pistol? Was he shooting back? It wasn't long before things came to a head. On a dusty Kansas street, one of the saloon owners drew his gun, but Hickok was quicker. He fired first, killing the man on the spot. But fate played a cruel trick on Hickok that day. In the chaos that followed, a figure came rushing toward him, and Hickok, reacting on instinct, fired again. To his horror, he had shot and killed his close friend, Deputy Marshal Mike Williams. That single tragic moment would haunt Hickok for the rest of his life. Let's travel even farther west now, to the cold, rugged lands of Alaska. Once known as Russian America, Alaska's history is one shrouded in mystery for many. In 1741, Russian explorers discovered this vast, untamed wilderness, sparking a wave of hunters and business interests that saw the region as ripe for expansion. Russian settlements were soon established, even reaching as far south as Northern California. But after the Crimean War, Russia's fortunes took a downward turn. Desperate to alleviate its mounting debts, Russia sold Alaska to the United States in 1867 for a mere $7.2 million, or 2 cents an acre. At the time, many scoffed at the purchase, calling it Seward's folly. Little did they know that this frozen land would one day reveal its untold riches, from gold to oil, making it one of America's most valuable acquisitions. The sale of Alaska was passed by a single vote in the Senate, a razor-thin margin that changed the course of history. Meanwhile, far to the south, tensions between the U.S. government and a group of religious settlers nearly erupted into full-scale war. The Mormons, led by their charismatic leader Brigham Young, had fled persecution, settling in the remote wilderness of Utah in 1847. For them, this land was their Zion, a place where they could practice their beliefs in peace. However, the U.S. government saw their settlement as a potential threat, fearing the Mormons might form a separate, independent nation. In 1858, federal troops were sent to Utah to enforce U.S. law and remove Young as the territory's governor. As the soldiers marched toward Utah, tensions boiled over. A showdown seemed inevitable, but just as it appeared the country was about to descend into yet another civil conflict, negotiators managed to defuse the situation, avoiding a bloodbath that could have split the nation even further. Of course, no tale of the Old West would be complete without mention of the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral. Immortalized in countless films and books, the OK Corral shootout is often depicted as a long, drawn-out battle between lawmen and outlaws. In reality, the entire event lasted no more than 30 seconds. Yet, in that brief span of time, 30 shots were fired, 3 men were killed, and 2 others were wounded. The participants were Wyatt Earp, his brothers, and Doc Holliday on one side, and the notorious Clanton Gang on the other. Despite its brevity, the shootout has become one of the most iconic events in American history, embodying the lawlessness and violence of the frontier. As we journey into the heart of the Civil War, it's easy to forget that not all of the war's major battles took place in the East. One such battle, often referred to as the Gettysburg of the West, unfolded in the New Mexico Territory in 1862. The Confederacy, in an ambitious attempt to extend its reach, launched an expedition into the Southwest. Confederate forces hoped to capture vital territories and resources, but Union forces met them head-on in the mountains of Glorieta Pass, 7,000 feet above sea level. The battle was fierce, with soldiers enduring harsh winter conditions. After 3 days of fighting, the Union emerged victorious, but only because they had secretly destroyed the Confederate supply train, leaving them stranded without food or ammunition. This little-known battle played a crucial role in securing the Southwest for the Union and preventing the Confederacy from expanding westward. Yet, perhaps no figure from the Old West evokes more raw emotion than Geronimo, the fierce Apache leader who fought against both Mexican and American forces. Before he became a legend, Geronimo didn't even know how to use a rifle. Instead, he relied on his speed, cunning, and sheer bravery. After Mexican soldiers massacred his family, Geronimo swore vengeance. He charged at his enemies in a zigzag pattern, dodging bullets until he got close enough to use his knife. This terrifying tactic sent shockwaves through his enemies. They began shouting his name in fear whenever they saw him coming, Geronimo, a cry that would echo across the frontier, cementing his legacy as one of the fiercest warriors in history. Lastly, we visit the surprising connection between two iconic figures of the Old West, Chief Sitting Bull and sharpshooter Annie Oakley. In 1884, Sitting Bull attended one of Oakley's performances and was so impressed by her skill that he sent $65 and a messenger to her hotel room, requesting her autograph. Oakley, flattered but not one to be easily swayed, refused the money and instead invited Sitting Bull to meet her in person. The two would later become friends, with Sitting Bull even adopting Oakley as his daughter, bestowing upon her the name, Little Sure Shot. These stories, as strange and surreal as they seem, are all rooted in the dusty trails of the Old West, a time when life was fleeting. Death was around every corner, and legends were born from the unlikeliest of events. The truth, as always, is far more interesting than fiction. And as you wander deeper into the history of this rugged, lawless frontier, you begin to realize that in the Old West, anything was possible. And often, the impossible happened. However, the truth behind the Red Ghost legend is even stranger than fiction. During the mid-19th century, the U.S. Army initiated an experiment, known as the Camel Corps, to introduce camels as pack animals to the American Southwest. The hot, arid desert environment seemed like a perfect fit for these hardy creatures, and in 1856, the first camels were shipped from the Middle East to Texas. But the plan didn't go as expected. The camels, though strong and able to carry heavy loads over long distances, spooked the horses and mules traditionally used by the army. Additionally, the soldiers found the camels difficult to manage, as they were temperamental and sometimes aggressive. When the Civil War broke out, the project was abandoned, and many of the camels were released into the wild. Some of these camels, left to fend for themselves, roamed the vast deserts of Arizona, New Mexico, and California. The Red Ghost, as the story goes, was a particularly large and aggressive camel that supposedly trampled crops, terrified settlers, and even killed a man. Sightings of the Red Ghost persisted for years until a farmer reportedly shot and killed the beast, revealing the skeletal remains of a man strapped to its back. Whether this part of the story is true or not, the idea of wild camels roaming the American West is a fascinating and little-known chapter in frontier history. Another bizarre tale from the Old West involves Calamity Jane, one of the most iconic figures of the era, and her unlikely role as a caretaker during a smallpox outbreak. Despite her rough-and-tumble reputation, Jane had a compassionate side that often went overlooked. Having survived smallpox as a child, Jane was immune to the disease. which proved to be a life-saving advantage when a smallpox epidemic swept through Deadwood, South Dakota. In the midst of the chaos, Jane stepped up to care for the stricken miners, many of whom were quarantined in tents with little access to proper medical care. Armed with nothing more than herbs, Epsom salt, and sheer determination, Jane tended to the sick, often pulling a gun on those who tried to deny the men the food and water they needed to survive. Remarkably, 5 of the 8 men Jane cared for survived, a testament to her grit and dedication. In a place where death was a daily reality, Calamity Jane's selfless actions earned her the admiration of many, even if her methods were unorthodox. The Old West was also home to some truly outlandish spectacles, none more so than the infamous locomotive collision orchestrated by a man named William Crush. In 1896, Crush, a marketing agent for the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad, had the wild idea to stage a head-on crash between 2 locomotives as a publicity stunt. The event, held in a temporary town named after him, Crush, Texas, drew a crowd of 40,000 spectators, making it the second largest city in the state for a single day. At precisely 5 p.m., the 2 trains, traveling at 50 miles per hour, hurtled toward each other and collided with a deafening crash. For a brief moment, there was an eerie silence, followed by the simultaneous explosion of both boilers. Metal debris was sent flying in all directions, some pieces as small as a postage stamp, others as large as half a train wheel. Tragically, 2 people were killed, and many others were injured, including a photographer who lost an eye. Despite the disaster, the stunt generated massive publicity for the railroad, and Crush, initially fired for his role in the fiasco, was rehired after the media frenzy boosted the company's profile. As we continue our journey through the Old West, we can't forget one of its most famous showmen, Buffalo Bill Cody. Known for his larger-than-life persona and spectacular Wild West shows, Cody took his act across the Atlantic in 1887 to perform at Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee in London. The show, which included over 200 performers and a menagerie of animals, buffalo, elk, Texas steers, and even deer, was a massive hit, drawing crowds of 30,000 eager spectators. Among the audience were royalty, including the future King Edward VII, who was so charmed by the spectacle that he convinced Queen Victoria to attend. The show not only brought the wild frontier to Europe but also introduced figures like Annie Oakley and Sitting Bull to a global audience. Oakley, the sharpshooting star of the show, even caught the eye of Sitting Bull, who famously adopted her and gave her the name, Little Sure Shot. Buffalo Bill, ever the progressive, was also a vocal supporter of women's suffrage, insisting that women should have equal rights, including the right to vote, long before it became a mainstream issue. But the Old West was not just a stage for showmen. It was a place where outlaws like Billy the Kid carved out their own bloody legacies. Billy, infamous for his daring escapes and deadly confrontations, had a date with the gallows in 1881 after being convicted of murder. On the day of his scheduled execution, Billy managed to outsmart his captors yet again. As he was being escorted to the outhouse, Billy overpowered the deputy, stole his gun, and killed him. Then, in a bold move, he climbed onto the roof of the courthouse, where he waited for the sheriff to arrive. When the sheriff finally appeared, Billy taunted him from above, saying, "Look up, old boy, and see what you get," before firing his gun and making his escape. Though his freedom was short-lived, Billy was eventually tracked down and killed by Sheriff Pat Garrett. His legend as a wild and reckless outlaw lives on. Another figure who looms large in the mythology of the Old West is Wild Bill Hickok, a man whose reputation as a gunslinger was matched only by his quick wit. One of the most famous stories about Hickok involves a man who mocked him by calling him Duck Bill, a reference to his prominent nose. Hickok, never one to back down from an insult, responded with deadly force. In 1861, while working for the Pony Express in Nebraska, Hickok shot and killed the man who had taunted him. It was the first of many such encounters that would cement Hickok's place as a legend of the frontier. His feats of marksmanship were also the stuff of legend. According to some stories, Hickok once shot the center of a letter O on a poster from 50 yards away, 6 times in a row. Such tales, whether true or exaggerated, helped to build the myth of Wild Bill Hickok, a man whose very name struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. Jesse James, another notorious outlaw, also had his share of unusual stories. Known for his daring raids on trains, stagecoaches, and banks, James was feared throughout the West. But behind the legend of the ruthless bandit was a man with a surprising nickname, Dingus. The name came from an incident in James's youth when he accidentally blew off his own finger while cleaning a revolver. In pain, he shouted, "Oh, ding it," and the nickname stuck. It was a rare glimpse of vulnerability in a man otherwise known for his cold-blooded violence. The Old West was a place where fact and fiction often blended together, creating a rich tapestry of larger-than-life characters and incredible events. From the fearless medicine women who braved the frontier to the wild camels that once roamed the deserts. The stories of the Old West are as diverse as they are fascinating. Whether caring for the sick, staging spectacular train crashes, or escaping the hangman's noose, the people of the Old West lived lives that were anything but ordinary. And though their time has long passed, their legends continue to captivate and inspire, reminding us that sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. The bizarre story of the Red Ghost continues to captivate audiences. But what truly lies behind this haunting legend is the odd reality. The so-called ghost was none other than a red-haired camel wandering the American frontier. When the creature was found munching on a rancher's tomatoes, it was shot and killed. But how did wild camels even end up in the wilds of the American West? The answer goes back to the ambitious ideas of Jefferson Davis, then Secretary of War. He believed camels could be the key to the U.S. Army's success in navigating the harsh deserts of the West. In 1855, Davis allocated $30,000 for the purchase of camels and dromedaries from the Middle East, intending to use them for military purposes. The U.S. Army traveled across the globe, securing 75 camels, which were soon brought to Camp Verde in Texas. The idea was simple. Camels, accustomed to harsh desert conditions, could carry heavy loads of supplies and personnel over long, treacherous distances, making them an invaluable asset for America's westward expansion. The camels quickly proved their worth. They were used to transport goods between Texas and San Antonio, but that wasn't the end of the experiment. 24 of the camels were sent to California for an arduous 1,200-mile expedition across barren, dry terrain. Despite the difficulty of the journey, the camels thrived, proving Davis right about their potential. However, the U.S. government, after initial enthusiasm, declined to expand the project. One of the main reasons? The powerful mule lobby, which was opposed to the competition that camels posed to their beloved mules. Yes, there was indeed a mule lobby back then, and it played a significant role in shaping the transportation choices of the day. When Texas seceded from the Union before the Civil War, the fate of the camels took a bizarre turn. Confederate soldiers, unsure of what to do with the foreign animals, simply released them. Some camels were caught and sold at auction, while others wandered off to Mexico or even further west. There are accounts of Confederate soldiers throwing camels off cliffs in frustration, and in California. Some camels were sold for use in races and others for mining expeditions. Over time, the camel's descendants roamed the American desert, occasionally spotted by locals who couldn't quite believe their eyes. The sight of a lumbering, red-haired camel would easily fuel legends like the Red Ghost, blending fact with myth in the desolate American frontier. Another strange tale from the Old West involves UFO sightings long before the infamous Roswell incident. In the late 1800s, reports of mysterious airships began to circulate in the western U.S., half a century before UFOs became a pop culture phenomenon. These sightings, often described as long, blimp-like ships floating eerily through the sky, were said to be manned by human-like figures. However, instead of assuming these ships were of alien origin, many believed they were the creations of a secretive genius inventor. In fact, Thomas Edison was so frequently credited with their creation that he eventually had to release a public statement denying any involvement. Despite the mystery, historians now believe these sightings were likely the result of dirigible test flights, but at the time, the stories added an extra layer of intrigue and excitement to the already mysterious Old West. Newspapers eagerly fed the public's fascination, embellishing the tales for entertainment value. While editors might have thought readers knew the stories were exaggerated, Many took them as fact, further fueling the legend of early UFOs in the American skies. Speaking of strange stories, let's talk about the dangers of drinking in the Wild West. Saloons of the era were notorious for serving up potent, and sometimes downright dangerous, concoctions to thirsty cowboys and miners. One particularly infamous drink was known as tarantula juice, sold at a saloon in the Sierra Nevada. This drink contained a cocktail of harmful ingredients, including strychnine and wood grain alcohol distilled from turpentine. The effects were as horrifying as you'd imagine. Strychnine, which is typically used as a pesticide, gave drinkers a burst of energy similar to the effects of methamphetamine. However, as their bodies processed the toxins, they would begin to feel a crawling sensation on their skin, as though tarantulas were scurrying up and down their arms. This eerie sensation was often followed by painful muscle spasms and lockjaw, making tarantula juice one of the deadliest drinks you could order in the Old West. But as we wrap up our journey through the wild, strange, and dangerous stories of the Old West, we are reminded that truth often outshines fiction. From camels roaming the deserts to UFO sightings long before Roswell, from legendary shootouts to deadly saloon drinks, the stories of the Old West continue to fascinate and enthrall. Thank you for joining us for another dive into the past, where legends are born from the dusty trails and untamed wilderness of American history. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next thrilling episode.